What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Hart, and today we have a one-game slate. That is right. We only have one game tonight, Boston versus Atlanta. So we have our first showdown slate of the NBA playoffs. So I'm going to be breaking it down, going over the best salary plays, some ways to get different from the field, some leverage plays, some strategies, all that good stuff in this video. So make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. I'll also be building some potential lineups at the end of this video. And we're coming off another great day on PrizePicks 2-0 sweep once again. We're on an 8-0 streak right now, so back to back to back to back sweeps there. So it's been great. So yeah, make sure to hit that like button and let's get into this breakdown. So starting this off, we'll just do a breakdown, a quick breakdown of each team, just going over the utility salaries of each player. So starting off here on the Boston side, we kind of saw the offense shift back to Tatum and Brown, as I kind of mentioned in my breakdown the other day when they played. I kind of expected the offense to flow back into Tatum and Brown, and then some other people on the side kind of chip in, but really it's just going through Tatum and Brown. And that's kind of what we saw last game. Tatum obviously struggled 8 of 21, but they're really trying to ride Jaylen Brown there at the end of the game. He went for another 30 plus real life points. He went for 35. So I kind of expect that to happen once again in a winner go home game, a closeout game for, winner go home for Atlanta and a closeout game for Boston. I expect Tatum and Brown to really try to take over. Tatum has just kind of been subpar, so I really expect him to step up in this spot here. So him coming in at the price tag of 11-2, I think that will scare some people away. Now, obviously, he's a fantastic play. He's a whole team. If you're going, I don't think it's wise to fade Tatum unless you think all of the value pieces or all the secondary guys on this team are really going to step up. Because otherwise, Tatum has the floor of like 35, at least 40 fantasy points. And then he obviously has a ceiling of 50, 60, even 70 plus. So fading a guy like Tatum, you're going to need him to go out there and score like maybe only 30 fantasy points. And if that happens, usually that means other people are struggling too, and their offense is just struggling as a whole, and they're not able to score. So other people would be doing bad. I just don't fading Tatum. Maybe if you're playing 150 lineups, you could definitely fade him. That makes sense. But if you're going to play one or a couple lineups, I think you need to at least have Tatum in your utility spot. He's just that big. He's just a huge part of the offense where it's really hard to fade him and feel great about it. So even though he's 11-2, I think it's one of those things where him in the utility spot, it makes sense. Him as the captain, I think across the board makes the most sense. Obviously, he's the most expensive, but I really think it's a standalone play here with Tatum. We know the floor is like 35, 40. You really can't say that about anyone else on the slate. Like Young, he's been all over the place. I know he's been playing a lot better recently, as you can see the past 3 games. But before that, it's like he can go out there and get you 30, 35 fantasy points and really, really struggle, especially if they focus their offense on him. It's not like you can really contain Tatum. He's still going to get ways to get to the basket and score, get rebounds, assists, all that stuff. So I think Tatum is by far the kind of standalone best captain play. Now he is the most expensive, so you're gonna have to get different with the utility spots. But just in terms of like overall best captain options, I think Tatum is the number one option. Everyone else kind of carries that risk. It's like they're all in their own tier. So Tatum's in the number one tier. That second tier is guys like Young, Brown, and Murray. All those guys have similar upside, the same as Tatum, but they're all a little bit riskier just in terms of their overall production and how safe they are. And then you have that third tier of guys like White, Smart, Hunter, Horford, Williams, and Brogdon, all guys, and even Bogdanovich. Maybe you can throw Capella in there. He's kind of the last tier, but this kind of mid-range tier, the third tier, it's all guys that if you're making 150 lineups, you're going to want to take at least a chance on one of these guys in at least a few lineups as your captain, just because they all possess the upside to get you 40, 45 fantasy points, maybe 50 if they're having a really, really good game. And if they're in the captain spot, obviously that means you're able to pay up for more stars and more guys who have a better and safer floor. And so with that in mind, you can definitely stuff your lineup with full of guys in the mid range and maybe a star or two. Otherwise, if you're playing just Tatum in the captain spot, it's gonna be hard to get a good amount of guys that have a safe enough floor where you feel great about it. So if that makes sense, hopefully it does. We'll get more into the breakdown here. But yeah, Tatum, I think he looks great. He's just a huge integral part of this offense. So it's hard not to at least like him in the utility spot, if not love him as a captain. Trey Young, oops, let me get back to the team by team breakdown. Jaylen Brown, it's one of those things. I've been riding him, paused the whole series. He's finally showed up the past 2 games, 41 and 51 fantasy points, 31 real life points, and then 35. So he's shooting the ball very, very solid here. I kind of expect the same. Like no one can really guard him. Now, DeJounte Murray is back. So that does help out a little bit. He's a solid defender. Tatum doesn't like to, or excuse me, Brown doesn't like to post up as much with DeJounte Murray in there, but I still think he looks very, very solid at 9,400. But you can definitely make the argument to fade him because if he goes out there and he scores, 35, 40 fancy points, you can definitely get cheaper options like a White, Smart, Horford, Williams, Brogdon, guys who can score similar points. Maybe if they're 10 points less, but you're still saving, a couple $1,000 in terms of salary to roster them instead of Jaylen Brown. So it's like that's kind of the strategy to think of. Is you really want obviously the most optimal captain, the captain who's going to score the most points, and then in your utility spots, you want the guys who have enough upside and a safe enough floor to provide you that base where it's like, all right, I nailed the captain. Now I just need all my other guys to just have their average games, and I'm going to be at least cashing, if not taking it down. So that's kind of the thought there. But yeah, Brown, he's definitely a captain mention. As I mentioned, he's more that second tier. I think he looks like a solid utility spot. I think for me, he'd rather almost be kind of more along the lines of just like a captain play and not really a utility play, just because I like his upside as a captain, as a cheaper captain. Obviously, he's risky. He can definitely go out there and get you only like 30, 35 fancy points. And with that in mind, at his price tag, I think I'd rather just pay down for one of these other guards who have the similar upside, kind of a similar floor, and come in at a way cheaper price tag in that utility spot. So that's kind of my thoughts there with Jaylen Brown. I prefer him as a captain. He's a fine utility spot guy, but I think I just really, for me personally, I'd rather get to him as a captain. Derek White, as I mentioned, he's kind of that second tier, along with, excuse me, third tier along with White, excuse me, White's in the third tier along with Smart, Horford, Robert Williams, and Brogdon. This is kind of the tier where it's like you can take shots on these guys in the captain spot, as I mentioned, if you're playing 150 lineups. Easily, easily take shots on these guys in at least a few lineups each as a captain, just because we know the upside is there, right? Like Derek White, as we saw the first two games, or excuse me, the second and third game, 45 fantasy points. Like, sure, Tatum can still go out there and score like 55, 60 fantasy points. But if you go to Derek White as a captain over Tatum, you're saving so much salary, and that's going to allow you to pay up for, if you go to Tatum as a captain, you're probably going to have to pay down for at least one or two guys in the utility spots. Maybe like, um, maybe you're going to have to get down to Sam Hauser. Maybe you're going to have to get down to like a Jalen Johnson, another guy, like two cheap options, two cheap guys that really don't really have a ceiling unless they really hit their like peak game. And that's going to hurt you because if you have Derek White in there as a captain and you're able to pay up for those last two spots there, then you're obviously going to have a way greater chance of your two guys. Like maybe it's like a Brogdon and maybe it's like a Robert Williams. Maybe you're going to have a greater chance. You're obviously going to have a way better chance of those two guys having solid games than you are Sam Hauser and Jalen Johnson, if that makes sense. So White, very solid captain play. I prefer him as a utility play. I don't know if he has enough upside right now. I think the offense, as I mentioned, is going to flow through uh, Tatum and Brown like it did this last game. But as you can see, he still has very solid upside. So I think he's a very solid utility spot play. Not Smart, as I mentioned, could be a captain play, but I think I prefer him in the utility spot. It really comes down to ownership here for these guys and kind of ownership overall across the board for the showdown slate. Like you can really take advantage of ownership on showdown slates just because if someone's gonna be super, super chalky, let's say Derek White's super, super chalky. I mean, just get down to Marcus Smart and Malcolm Brogdon for way cheaper because if White is super chalky and he has an average game or has a below average game, those lineups are dead. Especially if Smart and Brogdon do fine or if they do really well, all those lineups who had White are going to be dead. It's a showdown slate. So it's not like you're going to be getting way different across the board. It's like he becomes just a huge bust and huge dud, especially if they're in the captain spot, but more so in the utility spot. If there's like 45, 50% of the lineups have him and he just does bad, you're avoiding that landmine. So that's why ownership matters so much on these showdown slates, just because it allows you to really take advantage of the fact that someone maybe has a bad game or there's someone who's very cheap that no one wants to take a shot on. You take that shot and they do very well. You have all that leverage on the field. So definitely take an eye on the ownership percentages for this slate tonight. Definitely factor that into your guys' lineups. Al Horford. Sure, he's kind of more of that like fourth tier. Haven't seen a game in forever since the beginning of March where he went for 57. So it's like he can possess that upside. If you wanted to get super, super weird and risky, you can definitely look to him as a captain play there at 6,400. But he's just more of a filler utility spot guy, which I don't mind. Same thing there with Robert Williams. We saw there in game, was it five, or excuse me, four? Yeah, game four there, went for 44. So another one of those guys that can easily go off for 40, 45 plus if he's having a really solid game. So he's definitely worth a mention, worth a look at a captain, but another very solid utility spot guy. And then Malcolm Brogdon, same thing. He can go for 45, 40, 45 if he's having a really, really solid game off the bench. That's kind of the issue, though, is his minutes aren't a guarantee. So that's the big risk there with Brogdon. So he's more safer as a utility spot guy. Sure, you could take a shot there as a captain, but he looks like a very, very solid utility spot guy. And with these guards, as I mentioned, it comes down to ownership. Like, if the ownership's going to be spread out across the board, I like White and Brogdon because I like getting a little bit riskier with Brogdon, even though his minutes aren't as safe as Smart and White. But if it's going to be, directed towards one guy, like if Brogdon's going to be super popular, I'd rather get to Smart and White, and kind of vice versa. If White's going to be super popular, I'd rather get to Smart and uh, Brogdon. So that's my thoughts there on the Boston side. Sure, you could take a punt play on a guy like Sam Hauser, Grant Williams, maybe even a Blake Griffin, but I don't think there's a need. Now moving on to the Atlanta side here. For Atlanta, Trae Young, 10-8, kind of that very top second tier option as a captain play. As we can see, he's huge upside. He's been shooting the ball a ton. Now DeJounte Murray is back, so I expect his shots to go down a little bit, but I still expect him to shoot 20 plus times. So very solid captain play. Obviously the second most expensive captain on the slate, but he looks great as a captain play. Looks great as a solid utility piece all around the board. DeJounte Murray coming in at this very, very cheap price tag. Not really sure why his price tag is this cheap. As we saw, he's playing about 40 minutes a game. He's shooting about 20 plus times. And he was super, super productive every game so far in this series. 48, 55, 42, 47. So he looks like a very, very solid captain play. I think he's going to draw a lot of the ownership across the board because it's like Tatum's 11-2, Young's 10-8, Brown's 9-4, and people are going to see that box score of Murray at 8-6, be like, why would I not just throw him in the captain? Which is a fair value, but a fair assessment. But if he's going to be super, super popular, I don't mind avoiding him. But yeah, he looks like a very, very solid captain play. Very, very solid utility spot guy. So he looks like probably one of the best plays on the Atlanta side there at his price tag. DeAndre Hunter at 6'6". I think he's too expensive. Now, obviously, he's playing huge minutes, and he definitely has the upside there. But he's one of those guys where it's like he kind of struggles to get to mid to high 20s fantasy points. And his price tag at 6,600, I'd rather take a shot on those Boston guards. They're all a little bit more consistent, a little bit better than Hunter. So I think Hunter's more of just a contrarian option there. Same thing with Bogdan. He's going to shift back to the bench, so his minutes are going to be in question. One of those things where it's like he's definitely worth a look in the utility spot. Probably wouldn't put him in captain. Capella, another one of those risky utility spot guys. So it's like Boston, you feel a lot better and safer with all those guys. The Hawks guys, these cheaper guys, are a lot more contrarian options there in the utility spot. Same thing with John Collins. It's like, sure, you can throw him in the utility spot. You don't feel great about 5,000 for him. I'd rather get to a Kongu if you're going to get to someone 5,000 or less on the Hawks side. He actually closed a little bit there in that last game, 27 minutes. And then Bay going to shift back to the bench. Don't feel great about his minutes. He's more of just a dart throw, utility spot guy. And then Jalen Johnson, as I mentioned, minutes are all over the place. You really need someone to do poorly in a starting lineup or someone to get in foul trouble for Jalen Johnson to get minutes. But he could get you there. He definitely has solid upside in very, very limited minutes. But yeah, right now, not much interest in him unless you're kind of going like the stars and scrubs route into the captain spot. So with that in mind, strategies for this slate and kind of building out a lineup. As I mentioned, ownership's a huge, huge factor here. But one strategy you can go with, it's like, let's say we go to Tatum at captain. And it's all about, having the opportunity for the most upside to score the most points, as well as managing like ownership and salary. So if we go to Tatum as captain here, on the opposite side, we're going to want to get at least one piece. Let's just say it's going to be DeJounte Murray there, 8,600. Another piece I do really like here. Don't mind stacking Jaylen Brown with Tatum, but I think I'd rather go down to, let's say, like a Brogdon there, 5,800. Still have 6,200 left over. Let's see if we could fit Trae Young in there. We can. Don't mind that so far. We obviously the top option on Boston, the top two options on the Hawks side. We get another nice guard off the bench for Boston, 4,000 left over. This is where it's one of those situations where it's like you can punt play one of these spots here because if Tatum goes off, Murray, Brogdon, Young all have very solid games. You could easily punt play. Let's say you just put in a guy who is going to take a 0. Any of these guys down here, you can throw them in. If they get a 0, fine. You can survive. Why? Because it allows you to get $7,000 and pay up for a guy like Smart. So like there, Smart and Matthews. Obviously, Matthews is not going to play. He's going to get a 0. But Smart, he's that possibility to 30, 35 fantasy points. And if let's say you didn't punt play, so then now you have 4,000 left over. Like, what are you going to do? You go down here to 4,000. There's not much. There's Sam Hauser. You throw him in there, 4,800 left over, a Kongu. So it's like you're taking that risk of, you're going to get a 0 for one of those guys, but like Smart could definitely outscore Sam Hauser and a Kongu combined. So that's one of those strategies where it's like it doesn't, when you first think about it, you're like, why would I take a 0? But then you look at the math. It's like, the only thing I'm losing is a tad bit of upside by taking that 0, but it's like, would you rather have Sam Hauser and a Kongu? Sam Hauser, a guy who's barely played, not really productive, and a Kongu who's very, very foul prone. Like, he is productive, but still, his ceiling's kind of been Marcus Smart's floor. So it's like, would you rather have those two or get risky, get that guy with a 0 in there in your lineup, whoever it is you want to throw in there, and then it allows you to have 7,000 left over to get to a Smart, to get to a Hunter, or Horford, Williams, whoever it may be. Obviously, Smart would probably be the best option of those. But I think you guys are falling around. That's one of those options where it's like you can definitely get, super contrarian, take that 0, but it allows you to pay up for Tatum, Murray, Brogdon, Young, and Smart. And it still gives you the same upside if you weren't going to take a guy with a 0. So that's kind of one strategy there. The other strategy I do like doing is, taking that risky dart throw. Now, if you're a single entry guy, I wouldn't suggest doing this. More so if you're a 150 lineup kind of person, you could have to do this strategy. But I kind of did it throughout the NFL. It had a decent hit rate where it's like I would kind of focus in on one cheaper captain in the captain spot. So let's say, just getting super risky. Let's say let's say a Robert Williams. As we saw, minutes are slightly going up, and he's a guy who's going to be super, super productive even in a limited amount of minutes. So like, let's say Robert Williams, if we're putting him in the captain spot, we want 40, 45, and we want kind of these other guys to have, average games where Tatum maybe goes for 50, 55, Young goes for like 50, 55 or less. Same thing with Brown, Murray, White, all those guys to have, 55 or less fantasy points, because then it makes Robert Williams viable as a captain, because even though there's like a 10-point difference there between the two as captains, Robert Williams is going to allow you to pay up for more across the board than it would obviously with Tatum. As I mentioned, one of those strategies, it's like you can take that 0, go with Marcus Smart, or you can go Sam Hauser and like a Sadiq Bey or whatever that option was there. But with Robert Williams as captains, you can see 8,200 left over to fill out our spot. So it's like we can go to a Jaylen Brown, a Tatum, a DeJounte Murray, still 5,900 left over. So that's a lot. We can get to, if you want to go with one of these cheaper guys, you can go down there. But let's say like, let's go with the Bogdanovich, and then 6,400 left over, a Horford. You're getting a very, very solid floor from all these guys. Horford, solid floor, Bogdan, solid floor, Murray, Tatum, Brown, Williams. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, that's kind of what you're getting. You're playing for more a safer, balanced build. Obviously, you risk your captain, but you get that safer, balanced build in the utility spots. And it's like, otherwise, as I mentioned, if you go for one of the more expensive captains, like a Young, you're going to want to get at least Tatum or Brown in your utility spot. So let's just say Brown there. And then you can definitely fill out like the mid-range with these mid-range guys. Let's say White, you want to load up on like one or two of these guards. Let's just say is Smart. But you're left over 5,100. So it's like you're going to have to make some moves here. So like 5,100, not a lot left over. Let's just throw in Capella for the sake of it. And then 5,000 Collins. So it's like, sure, that's fine. But you're really relying on Capella. You're really relying on Collins. And it's like that mid-range under 5,000, under 5,400 is not the best. Like these guys are very, very boomer bust. And you just don't feel great about going that route. So right now, I think my core plays for tonight, I think for captain, I think I'm going to ride with Tatum. It's going to be hard not to get to him. I really like him. I really like Brogdon. And We'll go to one guy on the Hawks side. Gonna be hard not to have Murray at least in the utility spot. So right now, I think that's kind of how I'm gonna start off my lineup. These three guys: Tatum, Brogdon, Murray, and then maybe I'll add one more, but I'll add that on my Patreon link down below. So yeah, that's kind of the video. Hope you guys, hopefully you guys were able to take some things away from this. Kind of understand that it's about ownership. It's about how you want to attack the slate in terms of like if you want to get risky, try to take down the 100K to first. You go with more. I'd say you kind of slightly lean towards taking one of those less optimal captains who have greater risk and not as high of a ceiling or floor as like a Tatum, Brogdon, or excuse me, Tatum, excuse me, Tatum, Brown, Young, or Murray. Or you go the safer side. You go with like the Tatum, but then you try to get different, riskier with utility spots where you, as I mentioned, that strategy where you take a zero with a guy, and then you're able to pay up for someone else. So those are the kind of thoughts I have. Hope you guys were able to enjoy this video, get something from it. Hit that like button if you did. Make sure to comment down below if you have any questions. Hit that subscribe button. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.